Paul Guerra was told this morning that he was no longer required, and it's understood that he's seeking legal advice. So stay listening. But the AFL apparently had no idea that this was coming. So if you're a D's supporter, I imagine you're sitting back today and saying, what is happening with my club off-field, given we are doing so well on the field? Sam McClure, award-winning AFL journalist and broadcaster. You hear him often on this station, and you can read his stories in The Age. Hello, Sam.
Afternoon, Jackie. Pleasure as always.
Well, what's weird, isn't it, this story? That was my initial thoughts. Where are you at with it?
Yeah, it's still weird. It's still weird hours after Xander Maguire broke this story. The strangest part of it, Jackie, is that we haven't heard from the Melbourne Footy Club. And that's the question that I come back to, whether it was planned or whether it was the heat of the moment. Like, let's say there was some sort of disagreement overnight with he and Steve Smith, who have had a tumultuous relationship, the president. That's possible as well. But the fact that we haven't actually heard from the football club suggests to me that it wasn't necessarily planned, because clubs these days, as you would well know, Jackie, are pretty organised when it comes to these administrative decisions. And if it had been in the works for, say, 48, 72 hours, perhaps even longer, they would have been armed and ready to go with a statement. Steve Smith would have held a press conference by now. Instead, this is bled into the afternoon, potentially even into the early evening. So we're none the wiser as to why their chief executive of only 7 months, Paul Guerra, has been essentially sacked on the spot this morning.
Can you talk to me about how the AFL would normally be told if there is something that is deeper than, say, a falling out within the board? Yeah,
that's right. I mean, you got to remember the AFL liked being kept abreast of all decisions from clubs, particularly ones that involve any sort of controversy. You would remember a few years ago when Essendon sacked its CEO, Andrew Thorburn, after I think 48 hours in the chair, because a story from the Herald Sun, I think at the time, shed some light on some affiliations with a church group that they didn't really agree with. The AFL are usually told of decisions like this. The AFL were as blindsided as the media. So it does sound like a Melbourne administration. It sounds like a President Steve Smith decision. Now, you have to remember that Paul Guerra 7 months ago was hired by then-President Brad Green. So, in essence, the President hadn't selected his CEO. Paul Guerra was the main reason that Stephen King, the new coach, was given his job. But this has come to a surprise to everyone in the industry. I mean, I was in the room standing alongside Paul Guerra on Friday night after they smashed the Tigers by 10 goals. Everything seemed hunky-dory. And to your point, off the top of the show, they're a club doing really well on the field. You speak to Melbourne fans right now, that they get the sense that for the first time in a long time, it feels like the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. So, they'd want to be very specific and very explicit as to why Paul has been moved on, because my understanding is he was completely blindsided himself this morning.
There has been reportage, and I know we have to be quite careful. This was in the Herald Sun a few months ago. Reportage about Paul Guerra owning a horse with an alleged fraudster. Has that come into it anywhere that you know of?
Yeah, so for your listeners who haven't followed this story, I think you're referring to Cy Yang Nguyen,
yes.
Who was a long-term sponsor of the Geelong Football Club, lived for months at a time in one of the Crown penthouses, and is currently before the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken, for his old company, Genu, which is a Geelong company, seeking to get back, I think, upwards of $15 million of cash that they allege that he stole. Look, it's a story that has made people at AFL House and people at Geelong very uncomfortable for a long time. And the more that it threatens to play out in court, I'm sure the more nervous people get.
And it just makes me wonder in relation to this, Sam, with the Melbourne Football Club investigating and a potential investigation within the club, reportedly, into the links there, alleged links.
No, yeah, I mean, I understand why your mind would go there. But without dodging the question, Jack, the simple answer at the moment is we just don't have enough information. Yep. We need to hear from Melbourne. We need to hear from Paul. I think both those parties should be afforded the right to speak on as to what's happened. If it was in relation, if Paul's removal as chief executive was in relation to something of a nature which had been playing out for some time, I go back to that original question in the interview. Wouldn't the club have been more prepared, given how much of a shock this is? Because now this is not me having a go at the Melbourne Footy Club. We don't have all the answers yet. But the longer this plays out, and the longer people like me come on radio shows like yours and not guess, but discuss with all the facts, it damages the brand of the Melbourne Footy Club.
Yeah,
and given that this is a club that has been through this,
yes,
they've been through, a tumultuous 5-year period. This is a club that won the flag in 2021, interstate, ironically, and then has never won a final since. Their supporter base have watched the club fall off the perch, and they got this guy in, not to be a saviour, but to breathe fresh life into the footy club. He was able to do that. There was clearly an uncomfortable relationship between Paul and Stephen Smith. I'm not sure the club was absolutely... I don't think they loved the fact that he was quite forward-thinking in the media. He came from Vecchi, where he used to do a lot of media stuff in his own volition. I'm not sure the old-school Melbourne Footy Club people thought that was a good idea. They prefer to be on the more conservative side. Remember, there was the situation with Waverley and the club moving to Waverley. There are those who think that Melbourne stalled on those conversations with the AFL and let Richmond in the door. And there's been frustration for several years about the Melbourne Footy Club not having a home base. And that's something that Paul talked about in his first ever interview when he was hired 7 months ago.
Racecourse as well.
About wanting to go to Caulfield. Yeah. So, this is a club who have been bereft of their own home base for several years now. There is more to this story than meets the eye. Unfortunately, we just don't have all the details right now.
Can you, in your experience, when the club goes through an off-field crisis, particularly one so unusual and unexpected as this, does it flow through to the players on the field, or are they able to get in their zone and not really look at all that and just play?
Depends on who you talk to. In my experience of covering footy, players are some of the best compartmentalisers that you'll come across. They very much get in that, particularly in season, they get in that mode of train, play, recover, train, play, recover. So, look, I think they'll be okay. They've got one of the best captains of the last 50 years in Max Gawn to get them through that. He nurtured them through the Simon Goodwin sacking, which feels so long ago now. I think that Melbourne as a team will be okay. They've got a new coach, Stephen King, who might feel the pressure. But again, coming back to that point, the Melbourne Footy Club need to, as quickly as possible, get on the front foot here, and they need to explain to their membership base why they have made this decision. Particularly, I think they're fourth on the ladder, aren't they? If they're not fourth, they're maybe fifth after what happened on Sunday. They're going really, really well, just after sacking arguably two of their best three players in Petrarca and Oliver. So, goodness gracious, just when we thought the Melbourne Footy Club were finding their feet, we find that they find themselves involved in another controversy.
Well, senior Melbourne Football Club analyst Neil Mitchell joins me now it's a new title, one of many, Neil, to talk about the fact that Melbourne has parted ways with CEO Paul Guerra. I'm just looking at his LinkedIn profile at the moment, where he describes himself as a growth-oriented leader with formal qualifications in engineering and management. Well, Melbourne Football Club has managed to engineer his exit from the club. What do you know about it, Neil?
I know I'm not a football analyst. I'm a Melbourne tragic. What do I know about it? I don't. I do know it'll be a surprise to Paul Guerra. I was talking to him only last week, and he invited me to go as his guest to one of the games. He was on top of the world. Things were humming along well. So it'll be a surprise. It's a year to the day since his appointment was announced. He's only been working there 7 months because he took it up on delay, but a year to the day, and he's 7 months in the job, he's gone. It worries me. I don't know why. No idea why. There must be, there'll be reasons which hopefully the president will tell, Stephen Smith will tell everybody. But the club's screaming out for stability everywhere. It needs stability. We're doing well. This will shake things up.
Okay, the irony here is that I had the team, they were ringing around furiously for somebody to have something clarifying to say about his departure, and nobody would speak about it. So we know that you're connected to the Melbourne Football Club, and there's not a news event that you're not across. So if you were to speculate, Neil, A, why the silence or the unwillingness to speak publicly, and B, is there any hint that you saw that may explain this sudden departure by Paul Guerra from the Melbourne Football Club?
I think the silence is simple. It's reported that Paul Guerra is considering his legal options, which would be fairly obvious. So I guess any number of people associated with the club wouldn't speak, although it's claimed the president, Stephen Smith, former fullback Stephen Smith, will be speaking later in the day, and I think the members are owed and supporters are owed an answer because, as I said, we've had such a great start to the year. Everybody's talking about values and stability. I have not had a hint of what or why. I was down at training. In fact, Paul Guerra invited me down to training the end of last year, and I spent quite some time with him and some of the players now to walk around, and they were all very happy about the atmosphere and the mood, and they've gone on to continue that on the field this year. Paul Guerra talked a lot about values and the values of the club and where the club was going. So this will surprise everybody. You know, it shouldn't affect players, but it does, this sort of thing. It does unnerve them a bit.
Well, yes, because it is a sign, as you said, of instability, or unless there's been some defining event that was just so egregious that it warranted his sacking or his resignation. You wonder what it might be. Do you think it's going to show up in Melbourne's next game? I mean, it's good news for whoever they're playing next.
No, I don't know. I really don't know because I don't know how close the players were to him. They seem to be, and they'd been dealing with him for a while. Look, you'd hope it's not a disagreement over what jam to serve on the scones at three-quarter time. It will be something serious. Is it a disagreement about strategy, about direction? You would think it wouldn't be that quick if it was a matter of that sort of disagreement, but who knows what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, good point.
There was a lot of concern about the incident where the partners of the players were told more than they should have been about the case of one player and his problems. What's his name before? Stephen May. And the players were briefed too broadly on that, but that wasn't. Paul Guerra didn't run the meeting.